The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Crescent Falls reeked of rust and desperation. Maya's wrists burned against the silver chains as 3 rogue wolves circled her like vultures, their eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction. They thought they'd captured easy prey, just another worthless omega to sell to the highest bidder. If only they knew the truth. The woman they'd kidnapped wasn't some helpless servant. She was the lost heir to the most powerful bloodline in supernatural history, and she'd been hiding in plain sight for 5 years, protecting a prophecy that could either save or annihilate every pack in North America. But her captors had made one fatal mistake. The moment they touched her, they'd triggered a mate bond she thought was severed forever. Now the warehouse walls trembled as an earth-shattering roar echoed through the night. The Alpha King had found her, and he was absolutely furious. But here's what nobody expected, not even him. Why had Maya been running from the one person destined to protect her, and what devastating secret was she willing to die to keep hidden? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The largest of the rogues, a scarred brute with yellowing teeth, grabbed Maya's chin roughly. Pretty little thing, aren't you? The buyers are going to love those defiant eyes. His putrid breath made her stomach churn, but Maya forced herself to remain still. She couldn't reveal her true nature, not yet. Too much depended on maintaining her carefully constructed facade. Please, she whispered, letting her voice shake with manufactured fear. I don't have any money. I'm nobody important. The second rogue laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the concrete walls. That's what they all say, sweetheart. But your scent tells a different story. You smell like moonlight and power, even if you are just an omega. If only they knew how right they were about the power, and how wrong they were about everything else. Another thunderous roar shattered the night air, closer this time. The warehouse's rusted metal groaned in response, and Maya felt the familiar electric tingle that always preceded his arrival. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from fear of the rogues, but from the terrifying anticipation of seeing him again after 5 years of careful avoidance. What the hell was that? The third rogue, younger than the others with nervous energy radiating from his slight frame, backed toward the loading dock doors. The scarred leader snarled, his partial shift causing claws to extend from his fingertips. Probably just a territorial dispute, nothing to do with us. Maya almost laughed at their ignorance. That roar could only belong to one creature in all of North America, and territorial disputes were the least of their concerns now. The massive warehouse doors exploded inward with a deafening crash. Metal twisted and concrete crumbled as a figure stepped through the destruction, silhouetted against the moonlight. Even in his human form, Kieran Blackthorne commanded absolute authority. 6.5 feet of lethal grace, with midnight black hair and eyes that burned like silver fire when his wolf was close to the surface. The Alpha King had arrived. "Put her down," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of primal dominance that made every shifter within a 50-mile radius instinctively submit. The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop 10 degrees. The rogues froze, their bravado evaporating like morning mist. The youngest one actually whimpered, his knees buckling as Kieran's power washed over them in devastating waves. But Maya felt something else entirely, the mate bond, which she'd suppressed through sheer force of will and carefully crafted herbal suppressants, flared to life with painful intensity. Every cell in her body screamed for his touch, for his protection, for the completion that only he could provide. She ruthlessly crushed the feeling down. She couldn't afford such weakness, not when the prophecy still hung over them like a sword of Damocles. "Alpha King," the scarred rogue stammered, finally recognizing the magnitude of his mistake. "We didn't know. We thought she was just—" "You thought wrong." Kieran took another step forward, and Maya could see his wolf pressing just beneath the surface of his human facade. "I won't ask again." The rogue's hands shook as he fumbled with the keys to Maya's chains. The silver restraints clattered to the concrete floor, leaving angry red marks on her wrists that had already begun to heal. Maya stood slowly, never taking her eyes off Kieran. 5 years of separation hadn't diminished the raw magnetism between them. If anything, time had only sharpened the edge of their connection. "Hello, Kieran," she said softly, her carefully maintained Omega persona slipping for just a moment. His silver eyes widened, almost imperceptibly. He'd sensed the change, the glimpse of her true nature that she'd accidentally revealed. In that instant, she saw recognition dawn in his expression, not just of her identity but of what she truly was. The rogues chose that moment to run, stumbling over each other in their desperation to escape. Kieran let them go, his attention completely focused on the woman before him. "Maya," he breathed. "What are you hiding from me?" The scent hit Kyle like a physical blow to his chest, stopping him mid-stride in the marble corridor of the palace. His wolf surged forward, recognizing something that shouldn't exist, the lingering trace of his mate's fear mixed with the acrid stench of rogues. His eyes shifted to golden amber as he tracked the trail, following it through the winding passages until it led him to Maya's chambers. The door stood ajar, silence emanating from within like a held breath. He pushed it open to find overturned furniture, shattered glass, and worst of all, drops of blood on the stone floor. "Guards!" His voice thundered through the palace, carrying the authority of an alpha whose control was rapidly fraying. Within seconds, his beta fin arrived with a contingent of warriors, their faces grim as they took in the scene. "How many?" Kyle's voice was deadly quiet, the kind of calm that preceded a storm capable of leveling mountains. Finn's nostrils flared as he scented the room. 4, maybe 5 rogues. They couldn't have gotten far with her. They took Maya. The words left Kyle's lips like a growl, and several of the younger guards stepped back instinctively. The temperature in the room seemed to drop as his power leaked out, pressing against everyone present. "Find me everything, now!" As his warriors spread out to investigate, Kyle closed his eyes and reached for the bond he'd been carefully maintaining with Maya. It was there, faint but steady, like a golden thread stretching across miles. She was alive, but the fear and pain echoing through their connection made his chest burn with rage. He'd spent months courting her carefully, knowing she was skittish around alphas, knowing something in her past had taught her to hide. She worked in the palace archives, a quiet Omega who kept to herself and seemed content cataloguing ancient texts. He'd been drawn to her intelligence, her sharp wit, the way she challenged him during their conversations, without even realizing she was arguing with a king. But there had always been something more beneath the surface. Moments when her scent shifted slightly, when her eyes held depths that seemed older than her years, when she unconsciously moved with a grace that spoke of training no simple archivist should possess. "Your Majesty," Finn approached cautiously. "We found something." Kyle opened his eyes to find his beta holding a torn piece of fabric, not from Maya's dress but from a rogue's shirt. More importantly, it carried a scent that made his blood run cold. "Black Moon Pack," he snarled, recognizing the distinct musk that marked the notorious group of exiled wolves. They were led by Marcus Vane, a former alpha who'd been banished for attempting to overthrow the supernatural council. The fact that they'd targeted Maya specifically, rather than any of the more obvious noble Omegas in the palace, meant this wasn't random. "Prep the war party," Kyle commanded, already moving toward the door. "Full tactical gear. I want 50 of our best trackers and fighters ready to move in 10 minutes. Sir, shouldn't we—" 10 minutes, Finn." The alpha power in his voice brooked no argument. "And send word to the council. Tell them the Black Moons have made this personal." As his warriors scattered to follow orders, Kyle made his way to his private armory. He hadn't worn battle gear in 3 years, hadn't needed to since establishing the current peace treaties, but as he strapped on the reinforced leather and steel that had seen him through countless battles, he felt the familiar weight settle over him like a second skin. His wolf was practically feral with the need to hunt, to tear apart anything that dared threaten their mate. But Kyle forced himself to think strategically. Marcus Vane was cunning, brutal, but not suicidal. Taking Maya had been calculated, which meant he wanted something specific. The question was what a rogue alpha could want with a palace archivist badly enough to risk war with the most powerful pack in the territories. Through their bond, he felt a sudden spike of determination from Maya, followed immediately by what felt like power. The sensation was so unexpected, so at odds with everything he knew about her, that he paused in checking his weapons. Before he could analyze the feeling further, it was gone, replaced by what felt like careful blankness, as if she were deliberately shielding her thoughts from him, which should have been impossible for an Omega, especially one who wasn't fully mated. "Your Majesty, we're ready." Finn appeared in the doorway, fully armed and flanked by their best warriors. Kyle holstered his silver-lined blades and headed for the door, pushing aside his questions about Maya's strange behavior. There would be time for answers later. Right now, he had rogues to hunt and a mate to retrieve. The Black Moons had made a critical error in judgment. They were about to learn why even other alphas feared to cross the king of the Northern Territories. The scent hit Kyle like a physical blow, stopping him mid-stride in the ancient corridor beneath his stronghold. His wolf surged forward with such violence that his vision flickered between human sight and predatory gold. Every instinct screamed that his mate was in danger, the bond between them thrumming with her terror and pain. He'd felt her fear earlier, a distant echo through their connection, but had assumed it was another nightmare about her past. Now the metallic tang of her blood filled his nostrils, carried on the underground air currents that connected the tunnels to the forest above. "My king?" Marcus, his beta, fell into step beside him as Kyle began moving again, his pace quickening to something just short of a run. "What is it?" "Lyra." The name came out as a growl. Kyle's hands were already shifting, claws extending as his control began to fray. "She's hurt." He should have insisted she take guards, should have followed his instincts when every fiber of his being had rebelled against letting her leave the stronghold alone. But she'd been so determined to maintain her facade of independence, so careful to keep up appearances that she was just another Omega seeking sanctuary in his territory. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't so potentially catastrophic. The most powerful alpha in 5 centuries, reduced to sneaking through underground passages to avoid revealing that he cared about a supposedly lowly Omega, all to protect the secret that could unravel everything they'd built. The tunnel began to slope upward, leading toward an exit concealed among the roots of an ancient oak. Kyle had mapped every hidden entrance to his territory over the decades, paranoid preparation that was finally proving its worth. Through the bond, he could feel Lyra's consciousness wavering, her life force dimming in a way that made his wolf clawed his insides with desperate fury. "Sir, perhaps we should gather a unit," Marcus began, but Kyle cut him off with a look that made the beta stumble backward. No time. His voice had dropped to something barely human, and no witnesses. Because if anyone saw what he was about to do to whoever had dared touch his mate, word would spread. The careful balance of power that kept the shifter world from descending into chaos would crumble. Every rival pack, every ambitious alpha, every ancient enemy would know that the untouchable Kyle Thorne had a weakness. They emerged from the tunnel into the dying light of dusk. Kyle's enhanced senses immediately locked onto the trail, following the scent of Lyra's blood and fear through the underbrush. His wolf wanted to shift, to hunt on 4 legs with teeth bared, but he forced himself to maintain human form. He would need his human intelligence for what was coming. The voices reached him before he saw the clearing. Rough laughter, crude jokes, the kind of casual cruelty that marked rogues who had abandoned all pretense of honor. Kyle felt something cold and terrible settle in his chest as he recognized the tone. They weren't just threatening her, they were enjoying it. He crept forward until he could see them through the trees. 4 males, all shifted into their half-forms, surrounding a figure on the ground that made his heart stop. Lyra lay motionless, her clothes torn, dark stains spreading across the fabric. One of the rogues was reaching for her again. The rational part of Kyle's mind catalogued tactical information, their positions, weapons, escape routes. But rationality was drowning beneath a tide of primal rage unlike anything he'd ever experienced. His wolf wasn't just angry, it was murderous. "Should we kill the little Omega now, or have more fun first?" one of them asked. And that was the moment Kyle's legendary control finally shattered. He moved like death itself, crossing the clearing in heartbeats. The first rogue died before he knew Kyle was there, claws opening his throat in a spray of arterial blood. The second managed a startled yelp before Kyle's hand closed around his skull and twisted, the sound of snapping vertebrae echoing through the trees. The remaining two finally registered the threat, but it was far too late. Kyle caught the third by the arm as he tried to flee, the appendage tearing away from his body with a wet ripping sound that sent birds exploding from nearby branches. The rogue's scream cut off abruptly when Kyle's other hand punched through his chest cavity. The last one managed to shift fully, his wolf form bounding toward the tree line. Kyle let him get 20 feet before following, moving with inhuman speed. He brought the rogue down with a leap that would have been impossible for any normal shifter, landing on the wolf's back and driving him into the earth with bone-crushing force. When Kyle finally returned to the clearing, his clothes hung in tatters and he was painted crimson from claws to collar. The clearing looked like an abattoir, but all of that faded to meaningless background noise when he dropped to his knees beside Lyra's still form. Her pulse was weak but steady, her breathing shallow but even. As his bloodied fingers brushed her cheek, her eyes fluttered open, focusing on him with obvious effort. "Kyle?" she whispered, and he'd never heard anything more beautiful. The scent of blood still lingered in the air when Lyra finally allowed herself to breathe normally again. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the rough bark of an ancient oak, the adrenaline slowly ebbing from her system. The clearing behind her told a story of violence she wished she could forget. 3 rogue shifters lay motionless, their bodies testament to Kieran's lethal efficiency. She had seen dominance displays before, witnessed the raw power that alphas wielded when protecting their territory or pack. But what she had just witnessed transcended anything in her experience. Kieran hadn't simply defeated the rogues. He had obliterated them with a precision that spoke of centuries of combat experience. The way he moved, the calculated brutality of each strike, it painted a picture of someone far more dangerous than a simple pack enforcer. "We need to move." His voice came from directly behind her, though she hadn't heard him approach. When she turned, her breath caught in her throat. Gone was any pretense of the easygoing traveler she had met at the inn. Blood spattered his clothes, and his amber eyes held a predatory gleam that made her wolf whimper in recognition of superior power. "Who are you?" The question escaped before she could stop it, her voice barely above a whisper. Something flickered across his features. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. Someone who doesn't let rogues hurt innocents. He stepped closer, and she caught his scent again, that maddening combination of pine and something indefinably wild that made her pulse race. "Are you injured?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. The way he was looking at her, as if he could see straight through her carefully constructed facade, made her skin prickle with awareness. She had spent years perfecting her Omega disguise, learning to suppress her natural dominance instincts and mask her true scent. Yet under his scrutiny, she felt exposed. "Good." He turned toward the forest path, gesturing for her to follow. "There might be more of them. We're not safe here." As they walked deeper into the woods, Lyra's mind raced. The rogues had mentioned something about bounty hunters, about her being worth more alive than dead. But she had been so careful, had taken every precaution to remain hidden. How could anyone have discovered her true identity? The answer that kept surfacing made her blood run cold. If someone knew who she really was, if they had discovered she was the last surviving member of the Moonlight bloodline, then nowhere would be safe. The ancient power that flowed through her veins, the ability to manipulate the very essence of the moon's energy, was exactly what certain factions had been seeking for decades. "You're thinking too loudly." Kieran's amused voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. He had stopped on the path ahead of her, one eyebrow raised in what might have been concern or curiosity. "Whatever's got you spooked, it can wait until we reach shelter." She realized she had been broadcasting her anxiety through her scent, another slip in her usually ironclad control. "I'm fine," she lied, forcing her shoulders to relax. "Just shaken up from the attack." He studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could read every deception written across her face. "Right," he said finally, though his tone suggested he didn't believe her for a second. "There's a safe house about 2 miles north. We'll rest there tonight." The fact that he knew about safe houses in these remote woods raised another red flag, but Lyra found herself nodding agreement. Despite her growing suspicions about his true identity, she couldn't deny that he had saved her life. More importantly, every instinct she possessed told her that he meant her no harm, quite the opposite, actually. They walked in companionable silence for the next hour, following game trails that wound deeper into the wilderness. Lyra found herself stealing glances at her mysterious protector, noting details she had missed earlier. The way he moved with absolute confidence through terrain that should have been unfamiliar, the unconscious authority in his posture that spoke of someone accustomed to command, the subtle scars visible on his hands that suggested extensive combat training. When they finally reached their destination, a small cabin nestled in a grove of silver birches, Kieran produced a key from his jacket with the casual ease of someone who had done this many times before. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, pushing open the door and gesturing her inside. "I'll ward the perimeter." Ward the perimeter, another military term that didn't fit with his cover story. Lyra stepped into the cabin's cozy interior, her mind churning with questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Because the more she learned about Kieran, the more convinced she became that their meeting hadn't been coincidence at all. And if that was true, then she had walked willingly into a trap far more sophisticated than anything the rogues could have devised. The ancient stone chamber beneath the palace thrummed with power as Lyra descended the spiral staircase, each step echoing her racing heartbeat. The attack had shaken something loose inside her, something she'd kept buried for years. Her fingertips still tingled with residual energy from when she'd accidentally shattered 3 windows during Kyle's interrogation of the surviving rogue. She pressed her palm against the carved obsidian door, feeling the familiar warmth of recognition magic coursing through her veins. The massive stone slid aside with barely a whisper, revealing the sanctuary she'd hoped never to enter again. Crystalline formations jutted from every surface, their inner light pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. The Nexus Chamber, the heart of the ancient power that flowed through this realm and the source of her greatest shame. Here, surrounded by the raw magic of her ancestors, she couldn't pretend to be anything other than what she truly was. "I was wondering when you'd come here." Lyra spun, her heart leaping into her throat. Kyle stood in the doorway, his massive frame silhouetted against the corridor's torchlight. Even in the chamber's ethereal glow, his silver eyes seemed to burn with an inner fire. "How did you find this place?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "The same way I've known you weren't an Omega from the moment we met." He stepped inside, and the door sealed behind him with finality. "The question is, when were you planning to tell me the truth?" The crystals responded to her spike of panic, their light flaring brighter. She watched Kyle's eyes widen as he took in the chamber's reaction to her presence, understanding dawning across his features. "You're not just any shifter," he breathed, moving closer despite the power crackling in the air around her. "You're one of the primordials." The word hung between them like a death sentence. Primordials, the first shifters, blessed with magic so potent it had nearly torn the world apart centuries ago. They were supposed to be extinct, wiped out in the Great Purging when their power had corrupted half the realm. "My great-grandmother was the last known primordial," Lyra whispered, her facade finally crumbling. "Everyone believed the bloodline died with her. My family made sure of that." Kyle was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Instead of the fear or disgust she expected, his expression held something that looked like awe. "The rogues today, they triggered something in you." She nodded, unable to meet his gaze. "When I saw them threatening you, threatening our pack. The power just erupted. I've spent my entire life learning to suppress it, to appear weak and unremarkable. But around you, my control is slipping. Why? The single word held a weight of meaning. Lyra finally looked up at him, seeing her own desperate longing reflected in his silver eyes. Because you're my mate. True mates amplify each other's abilities. Being near you is like pouring gasoline on a fire I've spent 23 years trying to smother. The admission hung in the air between them. Kyle reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, before cupping her face in his hands. His touch sent shockwaves through the chamber, causing several crystals to sing with harmonic resonance. Do you know what I felt today when those rogues had you? His voice was rough with emotion. It wasn't just protective instinct. My wolf was ready to tear apart reality itself to get to you. I've never experienced anything like it. Kyle, you don't understand. The power inside me, it's not just strong, it's dangerous. The last primordial nearly destroyed 3 kingdoms before they managed to stop her. If I lose control, then we make sure that doesn't happen. His thumbs traced her cheekbones, and she felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Together, the council would execute me if they knew what I was. They'd probably take down my entire pack for harboring me. Let them try. The alpha authority in his voice made the crystals chime in response. I am the king, Lyra. My protection isn't something they can simply override. There's more, she whispered. The reason my family has hidden for so long, we've been guardians, protecting something that could unravel everything if it fell into the wrong hands. Kyle's eyes sharpened with interest rather than fear. What kind of something? Before she could answer, a bone-deep rumble shook the chamber. The crystal's light shifted from blue to amber to deep red, and Lyra's blood ran cold as she recognized the warning pattern. Someone's breached the outer wards. She was already moving toward a crystal formation in the far corner, her hands dancing over its surface as she accessed the protective barriers her family had maintained for generations. This isn't possible. Those wards have held for 300 years. The image that materialized in the crystal's depths made her stomach plummet. An army approached the capital, but these weren't ordinary soldiers. They were primordials, very much alive, and they were coming home. The ancient oak's roots dug deep into the sacred ground where Lyra knelt, her palms pressed against the earth as power coursed through her veins like liquid starlight. The moon hung full overhead, its silver light casting ethereal shadows through the grove where she'd hidden herself away from Damon's protective watch. 3 days had passed since the rogue attack, and the visions had only grown stronger. Show me, she whispered to the spirits that stirred beneath the soil. Show me what they're truly after. The world around her dissolved into fragments of memory and prophecy. She saw herself as a child, golden hair streaming as her grandmother pressed an ancient medallion into her small hands. The elder's words echoed across time, the bloodline of the first must never be revealed, little star, for when the darkness rises, they will seek to claim you. Lyra's eyes snapped open as footsteps approached through the underbrush. Her heart raced until Damon's familiar scent reached her, pine, leather, and something uniquely him that made her wolf purr with contentment. She quickly tucked the medallion back beneath her shirt, hoping he hadn't seen the way it glowed when she channeled her true power. You're supposed to be resting. His voice carried both concern and barely restrained frustration as he emerged from the shadows. Even in the moonlight, she could see the tension in his powerful frame, the way his dark eyes swept the grove for potential threats. I couldn't sleep. It wasn't entirely a lie. The visions had been relentless, showing her glimpses of a war that would tear their world apart if the wrong people discovered what she truly was. The attack keeps replaying in my mind. Damon's expression softened as he approached, his alpha presence wrapping around her like a protective shield. They won't get near you again. I've tripled the border patrols and... That's not what I'm afraid of. Lyra rose gracefully, leaves and earth falling from her dress. She wanted nothing more than to tell him everything, to share the burden of her secret, but the prophecy was clear. Even he couldn't know. Not yet. His hands cupped her face, thumbs stroking across her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. Then tell me what is. The lie burned her throat, but she forced it out. I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't found me in time, if they had succeeded in taking me. Something flickered in Damon's eyes, a darkness that spoke of violence barely held in check. They would have learned why crossing an Alpha King's mate is punishable by death. Slowly. Despite everything, warmth bloomed in her chest at his protective fury. She rose on her toes, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that tasted of desperation and unspoken truths. When they broke apart, his breathing was ragged. "There's something else," she murmured against his mouth. The way they looked at me, what they said, it wasn't random. They were specifically looking for someone matching my description. Damon went rigid. "What do you mean?" They called me the One, as if they knew exactly who I was supposed to be. She hated manipulating him with half-truths, but he needed to understand the danger without learning why she was truly being hunted. What if there are more of them? What if this was just the beginning? A growl rumbled deep in his chest as his alpha aura flared with barely contained rage. "Then we'll be ready. I'm calling the council tomorrow. If there's a larger threat, every pack needs to know." Fear spiked through her. The council meant alphas from across the continent, some of whom were old enough to remember the stories of the first bloodline. If they saw her, really looked at her, with the suspicion the rogue attack would bring. "Is that necessary?" She kept her voice carefully casual. "Maybe we should wait, gather more information first." "Lyra." His tone was gentle but firm. "You're going to be Luna Queen. These are the kinds of decisions we'll make together, but ultimately the safety of our people comes first. Always. Our people." The words should have filled her with joy, but instead they reminded her of the terrible choice that lay ahead. In her visions, she'd seen two paths, reveal her true nature and watch the world burn as ancient enemies rose to claim her power, or disappear forever to protect everyone she loved. Including him. "Of course," she whispered, hating herself for the deception. "You're right." As they walked back toward the pack house together, Lyra caught a glimpse of golden eyes watching from the tree line. Her blood turned to ice. The enemy had found her again. The ancient oak's bark pressed rough against Lyra's back as she fought to steady her breathing. The scent of her own blood mixed with damp earth and pine needles, creating a metallic cocktail that made her stomach turn. 3 hours had passed since she'd escaped the warehouse, and still her wounds refused to heal properly. Whatever those rogues had injected her with was interfering with her natural abilities in ways that terrified her. A twig snapped somewhere to her left. Lyra's head whipped toward the sound, her enhanced hearing picking up the deliberate placement of footsteps. Too heavy for a rogue scout, too confident for prey. Her heart hammered against her ribs as a familiar scent drifted through the trees, cedar and storm clouds with an undertone of barely contained fury. Kyle emerged from the shadows like a force of nature given form. His usual composed demeanor had shattered completely, leaving behind something primal and dangerous. Dark veins pulsed beneath his skin, and his eyes blazed with an inner fire that spoke of the ancient power coursing through his bloodline. When those burning golden orbs found her huddled form, relief and rage warred across his features. Lyra. Her name fell from his lips like a prayer and a curse combined. She tried to stand, to meet him with some semblance of dignity, but her legs betrayed her. The injection's effects were spreading, making her feel hollow and disconnected from her own body. Kyle closed the distance between them in 3 swift strides, catching her before she could fall. His hands were gentle despite the violence radiating from every line of his frame. "What did they do to you?" The question emerged as barely more than a growl, and she could feel his control fraying at the edges. "Some kind of suppressant," she managed, her voice hoarse from screaming earlier. "But it's not like anything I've felt before. It's blocking more than just my wolf." Kyle's expression darkened further. His fingers traced the injection site on her arm with infinite care, but she could see the murderous intent building behind his eyes. "They're going to pay for touching you. Every single one." "Kale, wait!" She grabbed his wrist, feeling the corded muscle tense beneath her touch. "There's something else." They knew things they shouldn't know, about the bloodlines, about the old territories. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "What kind of things?" Lyra closed her eyes, remembering the lead rogue's cold smile as he'd spoken of ancient power and forgotten treaties. They mentioned the Shadowmoon Accords, and they knew about the binding rituals. The temperature around them seemed to drop 10 degrees. Kyle went utterly still, his breathing shallow and controlled in a way that spoke of immense effort. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries-old authority that few had ever heard. "That's impossible. Those records were destroyed during the Great Purge." That's what everyone believed. Lyra struggled to focus through the fog clouding her thoughts. But someone's been collecting information, building files. They had photographs, Kale, old ones, from before the territories fell. A sound escaped him that was part snarl, part something far more dangerous. The trees around them began to sway despite the absence of wind, responding to the Alpha King's rising power. "Tell me everything they said, every word." Lyra recounted the interrogation as best she could, watching Kyle's expression grow more thunderous with each detail. When she mentioned the rogue leader's questions about her heritage, about bloodlines that supposedly died out generations ago, something shifted in Kyle's stance. "They're hunting for something specific," he said finally. "Someone specific." The weight of unspoken knowledge hung between them. Lyra had always known this day might come, when her carefully constructed identity would begin to crumble under scrutiny. But she hadn't expected it to happen like this, with violence and betrayal cutting through their growing bond like a blade. "There are things about my family that I haven't told you," she began, but Kyle cut her off with a shake of his head. "Not here. Not now." His arms tightened around her protectively. "Whatever secrets you're carrying, they can wait until you're safe." A new scent drifted through the forest, smoke and ash, growing stronger by the moment. Kyle's head snapped up, his nostrils flaring as he analyzed the wind. "They're burning something, covering their tracks." "The warehouse?" Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with her weakened state. If the rogues were willing to destroy evidence, it meant they'd already gotten what they came for. But what could they have possibly gained from torturing her? She told them nothing of value, revealed none of the secrets that could truly damage the supernatural world's carefully maintained balance. Unless they hadn't needed her to talk, unless the blood they'd taken was enough. "Kyle," she whispered, fresh horror blooming in her chest. The syringe they used, it wasn't just for injection, they drew blood too. The ancient ruins stretched endlessly before them, weathered stone pillars reaching toward a sky painted in shades of amber and gold. Kira's breath caught as they crested the hill, her wolf stirring restlessly beneath her skin. The air here thrummed with power so old it made her bones ache with recognition. "The Moonspire Sanctuary," Darius murmured beside her, his voice carrying a reverence she'd never heard from him before. "I thought it was just a legend." Kira forced herself to remain still, to keep her expression neutral, even as every fiber of her being screamed that this place knew her, remembered her. The massive stone archway ahead bore symbols that seemed to shift and dance in her peripheral vision, ancient script that her mind translated without conscious thought. "Here lies the heart of all wolves. Here the first laws were written in starlight and shadow. Legend has a way of becoming reality when you dig deep enough," she said carefully, following Darius down the moss-covered path. Her enhanced senses picked up traces of magic so concentrated it was like walking through honey. Behind them, Marcus and Elena flanked their small group, both wolves on high alert in this sacred space. The rogues had been tracking them for 3 days now, ever since the confrontation at the border. Kira could feel them like a persistent itch between her shoulder blades, their hunger for power driving them to pursue what they still believed was a helpless Omega. If only they knew the truth, that she could level mountains with a thought, that her bloodline stretched back to the very wolves who had built this place. "The texts said there would be a guardian," Elena whispered, her usual confidence subdued. "Something about trials and blood price." Kira nodded absently, her attention caught by a familiar carving on a fallen pillar. The intertwined crescents of the lunar bloodline, worn smooth by centuries but still unmistakable to those who knew how to look. Her grandmother had shown her drawings of this place, had made her memorize every symbol, every hidden passage. But standing here now, feeling the weight of destiny pressing down like a physical thing, she wondered if even her grandmother had truly understood what they were protecting. The sound of approaching footsteps made them all freeze. Darius moved immediately to shield her, his wolf rising so close to the surface that his eyes flashed gold. The protective gesture sent warmth spiraling through her chest, even as she fought the urge to remind him that she was perfectly capable of protecting herself. "Well, well," a familiar voice called from behind them. "Look what we've found." Kira's blood went cold as Vex emerged from the tree line, flanked by a dozen rogues whose eyes held the telltale emptiness of wolves who had given themselves over to darkness. Their leader's gaze fixed on her with predatory hunger, still seeing only what he expected to see, a weak omega ripe for claiming. "You've led us quite a chase, little wolf," Vex continued, his voice a mockery of gentleness. "But this game ends now." Darius stepped forward, power radiating from him in waves that made the air itself seem to thicken. "You're trespassing on sacred ground. Leave now, and I might let you live." Vex laughed, the sound sharp and ugly in the ancient quiet. "Sacred ground? These old stones hold no power, Alpha King, just like your pretty little mate holds no threat." His gaze slid to Kira again, and she saw the madness lurking beneath his surface composure. "Though I admit she'll make a lovely prize once we're finished with you." The rage that swept through Kira then was primal, volcanic. She felt her carefully maintained control wavering, felt the true depths of her power stirring like a sleeping dragon. The stones around them began to hum, a low frequency that seemed to resonate in her bones. Darius must have sensed the change because his head whipped toward her, eyes wide with sudden understanding. "Kira!" "I know," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the charged air. The ancient symbols on the archway were glowing now, responding to her presence, to the power she could no longer fully contain. "I know exactly where we are." Vex frowned, finally noticing the strange luminescence creeping across the ruins. "What trickery is this?" "No trickery," Kira replied, stepping out from behind Darius despite his sharp intake of breath. "Just truth." She felt the shift in her scent, felt her carefully constructed omega facade finally beginning to crack as her real nature bled through. "This is Luna's Rest, where the first laws were carved. And you've just made the mistake of threatening the last of her bloodline on the most sacred ground in our world." The light from the stones was growing brighter now, and Vex's rogues were backing away, their wolves recognizing ancient power, even if their human minds couldn't process what they were seeing. "Impossible," Vex snarled, but his voice held the first note of uncertainty. "You're nothing. I can smell—" "You smell what I wanted you to smell," Kira interrupted, her eyes beginning to glow with silver fire. "But that ends now." The ancient stone beneath Lyra's feet thrummed with power as she descended deeper into the underground chamber, each step awakening dormant magic that had slumbered for millennia. The walls pulsed with veins of silver light that seemed to respond to her presence, growing brighter as she moved toward the heart of the sanctuary. "The Moonwell chose you long before you were born," Elderthorn's voice echoed behind her, his weathered hands tracing protective runes in the air. "Your bloodline has guarded this secret for over 1,000 years." Lyra's wolf stirred restlessly beneath her skin, sensing the overwhelming energy that saturated every molecule of air in the chamber. This was why she had hidden her true nature, why she had allowed others to believe she was merely an omega. The power coursing through her veins wasn't just from being Kyle's mate, it was something far more dangerous and ancient. "Tell me everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the mystical humming that filled the space. Thorn moved to stand beside a crystalline pool that reflected not their images, but swirling galaxies of silver and blue. Your ancestor, Luna Seraphina, was the last guardian before the Moonwell was sealed. When the Shadow Wars threatened to tear apart the supernatural world, she made the ultimate sacrifice. She bound her bloodline to the well's power, ensuring that only her descendants could access its magic. The water in the pool began to churn, and Lyra gasped as visions flashed across its surface. She saw werewolves with eyes like molten gold battling creatures of pure darkness, magic crackling through the air like lightning. She watched as a woman, who looked remarkably like herself, raised her hands toward a blood-red moon, channeling power that could reshape reality itself. The shadow wolves were thought extinct, Thorn continued, his expression grave. But the attack on your pack proves they've returned. They seek to corrupt the Moonwell's power, to use it to bring eternal darkness to our world. Lyra's hands trembled as she reached toward the pool's surface. The moment her fingers touched the water, energy shot through her like liquid fire. Her wolf howled in recognition, finally understanding why she had always felt different, why her healing abilities surpassed even the strongest alphas. "Kyle doesn't know," she breathed, pulling her hand back. "Your mate's love for you is pure, but this burden was never meant to be shared," Thorn replied sadly. "The Guardian walks alone, protecting secrets that could drive even the strongest minds to madness." Above ground, Kyle paced the length of his office like a caged predator. Every instinct screamed that Lyra was in danger, though he couldn't understand how she could be threatened, while surrounded by his most trusted pack members. Marcus stood near the window, his usual composure cracking under the weight of his alpha's distress. "She's hiding something from me," Kyle growled, his eyes flashing between human blue and wolf gold. "I can feel her emotions through our bond, but there's a wall there, something she's deliberately blocking." "Perhaps she's protecting you," Marcus suggested carefully. "Mates don't always share every burden." Kyle's fist slammed into the desk, sending papers flying. "She's my mate, my Luna. Her battles are mine to fight." A commotion outside made both men freeze. Through the window, they could see pack members gathering in the courtyard, their faces turned skyward in awe and terror. The moon, though it was barely past sunset, blazed like a silver sun against the darkening sky. In the underground chamber, Lyra fell to her knees as power flooded through her. The Moonwell had awakened fully, responding to the Shadow Wolves' proximity. Ancient magic that had been dormant for centuries now poured through her, demanding to be channeled. "You must choose," Thorn said urgently. "Embrace your heritage and risk losing yourself to the power, or let the Shadow Wolves claim what they seek." Lyra thought of Kael, of the love that burned between them like an eternal flame. She thought of her pack, of the innocent lives that hung in the balance. The choice had already been made the moment she drew her first breath. Standing slowly, she approached the pool again, this time without hesitation. As she placed both hands on the water's surface, her reflection changed. Her eyes blazed with silver fire, and ancient markings appeared along her arms, glowing with the same light that pulsed through the chamber walls. "I am Lyra Nightmoon, last guardian of the Moonwell," she declared, her voice carrying new authority. "And I will not let darkness claim this world." The power that had been building suddenly exploded outward, racing through the earth toward every supernatural being for miles. Above ground, Kyle staggered as the bond between them flared with new intensity, finally understanding that his mate was far more than he had ever imagined. The real battle was about to begin, and neither love nor loyalty would be enough to guarantee their survival. The ancient oak's roots pulsed with energy beneath Elena's palms as she knelt in the sacred grove, her connection to the earth stronger than it had ever been. 3 days had passed since the attack, and while her physical wounds had healed, the awakening of her true nature continued to ripple through her like waves on an endless shore. "The bloodline remembers," Sage murmured, her weathered hands moving in intricate patterns above Elena's shoulders. "Your grandmother's power flows through you now, child, but it seeks its mate. Elena's eyes snapped open, golden light flickering in their depths. "What do you mean?" The old healer's expression grew troubled. The lunar gift was never meant to exist in isolation. It was designed to bond with its equal, the solar force that runs through the true alpha bloodlines. Without that balance... She trailed off, but Elena heard the unspoken warning. A thunderous howl echoed from the northern border, followed by another, then another. Elena shot to her feet, her newly awakened senses picking up the distinct signature of her mate's fury. Marcus was hunting, and from the intensity of his call, he'd found a trail. "Go to him," Sage urged. "But remember, your power is still unstable. If you lose control..." Elena was already shifting. Her wolf form larger than before, silver fur shot through with veins of moonlight that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. She bounded through the forest, following the psychic thread that connected her to Marcus, her heart racing as his rage flooded through their bond. She found him at the edge of Blackthorn Territory, standing over 3 subdued rogues while his beta, Cole, held them in silver-laced restraints. Marcus's massive black wolf was barely contained within his human form, his eyes blazing with golden fire as he interrogated his captives. "Tell me who sent you," Marcus growled, his alpha command so powerful that birds fell silent in the surrounding trees. "Tell me who knew about the location." The largest rogue, a scarred man with dead eyes, spat blood. "Go to hell, Alpha King. You think you're untouchable? Your precious mate isn't the only one with secrets." "Wrong answer," Marcus snarled, and Elena realized with crystal clarity that he was about to do something that would haunt him later. In his current state, consumed by protective fury, he wouldn't stop until the rogues were dead. She stepped into the clearing, allowing her natural luminescence to announce her presence. Every head turned toward her, including Marcus's, and she watched his expression cycle through relief, desire, and something that looked almost like fear. Elena. Her name was a prayer on his lips. "You shouldn't be here. It's not safe. I'm exactly where I need to be." She moved closer, noting how the rogue's eyes widened as they took in her transformed state. Silver hair flowed like liquid starlight, and her skin held a pearlescent glow that marked her as something far beyond their understanding. What did he mean about secrets, Marcus? The Alpha King's jaw tightened, and through their bond, Elena felt his internal struggle, fear, guilt, a desperate desire to protect her from something. "There are things you don't know," he said finally. "Things I should have told you before." "Before what?" Elena's power flared, responding to her emotional state. The very air around them began to shimmer. "Marcus, what aren't you telling me?" Cole cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Alpha, the Council of Alphas has been asking questions about the attacks, about the timing. Some of them think..." "Enough." Marcus's command cut through the night like a blade, but it was too late. Elena had heard enough to understand the implication, and her expression shifted from confusion to something approaching betrayal. "They think you're connected to this," she said quietly. "They think you orchestrated the attacks on me." "Elena, no, that's not..." Marcus reached for her, but she stepped back, power crackling around her like bottled lightning. The most powerful Alpha King in centuries just happens to find his mate right before she's attacked by rogues who seem to know exactly where to find her. Elena's voice remained steady, but Marcus could feel her pain through their bond like shards of ice in his chest. "How convenient." The scarred rogue laughed, a harsh sound that carried no humor. "Oh, this is rich. She doesn't know, does she, King? She doesn't know about the prophecy, about why you really sought her out." Elena's gaze fixed on Marcus, and in her golden eyes he saw the moment she began to truly doubt him, the moment their bond, still new and fragile, began to crack under the weight of secrets he'd thought he was keeping to protect her. "What prophecy?" she whispered. The ancient chamber thrummed with power as Lyra pressed her palm against the crystalline surface of the heartstone. Energy coursed through her veins like liquid fire, and for a moment she could see everything, every shifter in the realm, every heartbeat, every soul bound to the cosmic force that kept their world in balance. "The Shadowkin aren't just trying to break the barriers," she whispered, her voice echoing in the sacred space. "They're trying to corrupt the Heartstone itself." Kyle moved closer, his presence a steadying force as the visions overwhelmed her senses. Through their mate bond, she felt his strength flowing into her, anchoring her to the present moment, even as ancient memories flooded her consciousness. The rogues who had captured her weren't working alone. They were pawns in a larger game, one orchestrated by beings far older and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. The Shadowkin had been waiting, biding their time in the spaces between worlds, gathering power and seeking the one person who could either seal their prison forever or set them free. "What do you see?" Kyle's voice was gentle but urgent. "A choice," Lyra said, her eyes still closed as the visions continued. The oracle line was created for this moment. When the barriers weaken enough, when the Shadowkin grow strong enough to attempt their escape, the last oracle must choose, seal them away permanently and sacrifice the ability to shift from our entire species, or, she couldn't finish the thought, the alternative was too terrible. Or, Kyle prompted, or merge the realms completely. Let the Shadowkin return but bind them to the natural order. It would restore balance, but at the cost of everything we know. Our world would become something entirely different. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the ancient tunnels. Kyle's head snapped toward the entrance, his body instantly shifting into a protective stance. "We have company." Lyra reluctantly pulled her hand away from the Heartstone, the connection severing with a sharp pain that made her gasp. The chamber's glow dimmed, but the power still hummed beneath her skin, more accessible now than it had ever been. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his usually composed expression strained with urgency. "The rogues are regrouping. They've brought reinforcements, and they're not just ordinary shifters. Some of them—" He paused, struggling to find words. "Some of them don't smell right, like they're already partially turned." Kyle cursed under his breath. "The corruption is spreading faster than we thought." Lyra felt the truth of it through her enhanced connection to the realm's life force. Dark tendrils of Shadowkin influence were weaving through the barriers like poison in the bloodstream, seeking out those whose hearts harbored darkness and turning them into willing servants. "We need to get to the Lunar Council," she said, but even as the words left her lips, she knew it might already be too late for conventional solutions. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and dust rained down from the chamber's ancient ceiling. Whatever the rogues were doing above, they were using considerable force. The sacred site itself was under attack. "There's another way out," Marcus said, gesturing toward a passage Lyra hadn't noticed before. "It leads to the old temple foundations, but—" His words were cut off by a roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound was wrong, carrying harmonics that made Lyra's bones ache and her wolf whimper in distress. No natural shifter could make such a noise. "They're here," she breathed. "The Shadowkin have found a way to partially manifest." Kyle's transformation was swift and brutal, his alpha power flooding the chamber as his wolf surged to the surface. But even his formidable strength felt small against the otherworldly presence now pressing against the barriers of reality. Lyra closed her eyes and reached deeper into her oracle heritage, drawing on power that had slumbered for generations. When she opened them again, they blazed with silver light. The markings hidden beneath her skin began to glow, ancient symbols of binding and protection becoming visible as her true nature finally emerged fully. "Whatever happens," she said to Kyle, her voice carrying new harmonics of power, "remember that some choices require sacrifice. The mate bond between us. It might be the key to everything, but it might also be what we have to give up to save everyone else." Kyle's wolf eyes met hers, and in them she saw understanding, love, and an unshakable resolve. "Then we face it together," he said, "whatever the cost." The chamber shook again, more violently this time. Cracks appeared in the walls, and through them seeped a darkness that seemed to absorb light itself. The final confrontation was beginning, and Lyra could feel the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders like the gravity of dying stars. She had hidden her true nature to protect the world, but hiding was no longer an option. The time had come to embrace what she was, to make the choice that would define the future of all shifter kind, and to discover whether love could survive the crucible of cosmic responsibility. The ancient chamber thrummed with power as Lyra pressed her palm against the crystalline surface of the heartstone. The moment her skin made contact, visions flooded her mind like a torrential river breaking through a dam. She gasped, her knees buckling as centuries of memories that weren't her own crashed through her consciousness. She saw the first lunar guardians, women blessed by the moon goddess herself, tasked with protecting the delicate balance between the mortal realm and the celestial plane. She watched as they built the network of heartstones across the continent, each one an anchor point that kept the veil between worlds intact, and she witnessed the devastating war that had nearly torn everything apart. "The Shadowkin," she whispered, the word falling from her lips like a curse. In her vision, she saw creatures of pure darkness pouring through rifts in reality, their hunger for mortal energy insatiable. The lunar guardians had sacrificed everything to stop them, binding their own life forces to the heartstones to create an impenetrable barrier. All but one guardian had perished in that final battle. One had survived, tasked with ensuring the bloodline continued, that there would always be someone to maintain the seals. That guardian had been her ancestor. Footsteps echoed behind her, and she turned to find Kyle approaching cautiously, his eyes wide with concern and something else, recognition. The Alpha's power signature had changed the moment she touched the stone, and she knew he could sense the ancient magic now flowing through her veins. "You're not just any guardian," he said, his voice filled with awe. "You're the last of the original bloodline." Before Lyra could respond, the chamber shuddered violently. Dust rained from the ceiling as a sound like breaking glass reverberated through the air. The heartstone's light flickered, and for a terrifying moment she felt the barrier weaken. "They're here," she breathed, understanding flooding through her inherited memories. Marcus wasn't working alone. Someone's been teaching him how to corrupt the stones. The entrance to the chamber exploded inward, sending chunks of ancient stone flying. Through the smoke stepped Marcus, but he was no longer the rogue she'd encountered before. Dark veins pulsed beneath his skin, and his eyes had turned completely black. Behind him came others, wolves but wrong somehow, their forms twisted by shadow magic. "The last guardian," Marcus spoke, though his voice carried an otherworldly echo. "How fitting that you'll be the one to open the way for our return." Kyle shifted instantly, his massive black wolf placing itself between Lyra and the corrupted shifters. His growl shook the chamber, but even his alpha power seemed diminished in the presence of such dark magic. Lyra closed her eyes and reached deeper into the Heartstone's power, feeling the connection to every other stone across the continent. Some flickered weakly, their guardians long dead and their anchors failing. Others burned bright, but she could sense shadows creeping closer to each one. "You don't understand what you're unleashing," she called out to Marcus. "The Shadowkin don't distinguish between ally and enemy. They'll consume everything." Marcus laughed, the sound like breaking bones. "This world deserves to burn. Too long have the strong been held back by the weak. The Shadowkin offer true power to those brave enough to embrace it." One of the corrupted wolves lunged at Kyle, and the chamber erupted into violence. Claws met claws, supernatural strength against shadow-enhanced fury. But for every enemy Kyle brought down, another seemed to take its place, the dark magic allowing them to regenerate from wounds that should have been fatal. Lyra felt the Heartstone's power calling to her, showing her what needed to be done. The ritual the first guardians had performed could be repeated, but it would require an enormous sacrifice. She could bind her life force to all the remaining stones simultaneously, creating a barrier so powerful that nothing could breach it for 1,000 years, but it would kill her. She looked at Kyle, his magnificent wolf form bleeding from dozens of wounds as he fought to protect her. The mate bond sang between them, and she felt his love, his absolute devotion, his willingness to die for her. The future they could have together flashed before her eyes: children, a pack, a lifetime of happiness. Then she felt another heartstone fail somewhere to the north, its light going out like a candle in a hurricane. The barrier weakened further, and she sensed something vast and hungry pressing against the veil between worlds. Marcus raised his hand, shadow magic gathering around his claws like liquid darkness. Enough games. Kill the Alpha and bring me the Guardian. The corrupted wolves surged forward in a coordinated attack, and Lyra knew Kyle couldn't hold them all off. She pressed both hands against the heartstone and opened herself completely to its power, feeling the magic of her ancestors flowing through her. There had to be another way. There had to be. The stone pulsed brighter, and suddenly she could hear something, a whisper from the moon goddess herself, offering a different path forward. The ancient chamber thrummed with power as Lyra's fingers traced the glowing runes carved deep into the obsidian walls. Each symbol pulsed with ethereal light, responding to a touch, like old friends greeting her after a long absence. The air itself seemed alive, crackling with energy that made the fine hairs on her arms stand on end. "These markings," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast space. "They're not just decorative. They're a containment system." Marcus stepped closer, his wolf senses on high alert. The underground chamber felt wrong somehow, as if the very fabric of reality was stretched thin here. Containing what? Before Lyra could answer, footsteps echoed from the tunnel behind them. The rogues had found their trail faster than expected. Marcus positioned himself between Lyra and the entrance, his body already beginning to shift as his protective instincts flared. "How much time do you need?" he growled, muscles rippling beneath his skin. "I don't know." Lyra's hands moved frantically across the wall, pressing specific symbols in a sequence that seemed to come from some deep inherited memory. "The seal is deteriorating. If I can't stabilize it, then what exactly?" Her eyes met his, and in their depths he saw something that chilled him more than any enemy ever could: fear. Not for herself, but for him, for their pack, for everyone. Then the void breaks through, and everything we know ceases to exist. The first rogue burst into the chamber, followed by 3 others. They moved with predatory grace, but their confidence faltered when they saw the ancient symbols blazing to life around them. Even these hardened criminals could sense the otherworldly power radiating from the walls. "Well, well," the lead rogue sneered, though his voice carried an undertone of uncertainty. "The little Omega thinks she's found sanctuary. This changes nothing." Marcus's laugh was dark and deadly. "You still don't understand what you're dealing with, do you?" His transformation this time was different from before. The power that erupted from him wasn't just his own. It was amplified by his bond with Lyra, magnified by the ancient magic permeating the chamber. When his wolf form solidified, it was larger than any the rogues had ever encountered, his eyes burning with silver fire that seemed to pierce their very souls. But even as Marcus engaged the intruders, Lyra's attention remained fixed on the wall. The symbols were telling a story, one that her bloodline had been charged with protecting for countless generations. Her ancestors hadn't just been powerful, they'd been guardians, the last line of defense against something that had nearly destroyed the world once before. The void wasn't empty space or mere darkness. It was hunger given form, consciousness stripped of conscience, power without purpose except to consume, and the barrier between their world and that endless appetite was failing. Behind her, she heard the sounds of battle, snarls, growls, the impact of bodies colliding with stone. Marcus was holding his own, but he was outnumbered, and she could sense his concern for her safety affecting his fighting ability. "Marcus," she called out, never taking her hands from the wall, "trust me, focus on them, not me." Her words seemed to unlock something in him. She felt their mate bond strengthen, felt his absolute faith in her capabilities flow through their connection. It was exactly what she needed. The final sequence of symbols blazed to life under her touch, and suddenly the chamber filled with blinding white light. The rogues cried out in alarm, temporarily blinded, giving Marcus the opening he needed to finish the fight with brutal efficiency. When the light faded, the symbols had settled into a steady, healthy glow. The oppressive feeling that had pressed against the edges of consciousness was gone, replaced by a sense of security that felt like coming home. Lyra slumped against the wall, exhausted. It's done. The seal is restored. Marcus, back in human form but breathing heavily from the fight, approached her carefully. For how long? A few generations, maybe longer if no one else finds this place. She turned to face him, and he could see the weight of centuries of hidden knowledge in her expression. My family has been doing this for over 1,000 years, checking the seals, strengthening them when necessary, keeping the world safe from something it doesn't even know exists. And the price? Living in exile, never claiming our true power, always pretending to be less than we are. Her voice caught slightly. Until I met you. Until I had something worth fighting for beyond just duty. Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her close as the magnitude of her sacrifice became clear. She hadn't just been hiding from persecution, she'd been carrying the weight of the world's survival on her shoulders, alone. Never alone again, he murmured against her hair, and felt her finally truly relax in his embrace. In the aftermath of battle and revelation, they stood together in that ancient place, guardian and protector, bound by more than love now, bound by shared purpose. The ancient chamber trembled as Lyra's power surged through the crystalline walls, each pulse of energy causing the very foundations of the mountain to shudder. Kyle stood frozen at the threshold, his alpha instinct screaming warnings as he witnessed his mate's true nature unfold before him. The woman he thought he knew was dissolving before his eyes, replaced by something far more dangerous and magnificent. Lyra, he whispered, but his voice was lost in the growing storm of magic that swirled around her transformed figure. Her skin had taken on an ethereal luminescence, veins of silver light tracing patterns across her arms and face like living tattoos. The air itself seemed to bend around her as she approached the heartstone, the massive crystal that pulsed with the same rhythm as her power. When she placed her palms against its surface, the entire mountain range echoed with a sound like singing glass. "The Shadowborn have found us," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made Kyle's wolf whimper in recognition of something primal and ancient. They've been tracking the bloodline for centuries, waiting for this moment. Through the chamber's crystalline walls, Kyle could see dark shapes moving up the mountainside with unnatural speed. Their forms seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, leaving trails of emptiness in their wake. At their head strode a figure that made every instinct in Kyle's body scream for retreat. Tall, imposing, with eyes like burning voids. "Marcus," Lyra breathed, and the hatred in her voice was colder than Arctic wind. "My brother." The revelation hit Kyle like a physical blow. Brother. The implications crashed over him as pieces of an impossible puzzle began falling into place. If Lyra was connected to these creatures, if she shared blood with something so fundamentally wrong, then what did that make her? What did that make them? "He's not what he once was," Lyra continued, her hands never leaving the Heartstone's surface. "The shadow consumed him when he tried to claim our inheritance without the proper preparations. Now he's neither living nor dead, sustained only by his hunger for what I carry." The Shadowborn reached the outer defenses of the sanctuary, and Kyle watched in horror as the protective barriers his pack had died to maintain simply dissolved at their touch. These weren't rogues or even corrupted shifters. There was something far worse, something that seemed to exist in opposition to life itself. "The power we inherited," Lyra said, her voice growing distant as more of her attention focused on the ritual she was performing. "It was never meant to be held by one person alone. That's why the Guardians scattered, why they hid the truth. Together, we were meant to be the balance between creation and destruction, light and shadow." Apart, we become monsters, Kyle finished, understanding flooding through him. She turned to look at him then, and he saw tears of liquid starlight streaming down her face. I've been running from him for so long, pretending to be something small and harmless. But he's grown stronger while I've grown weaker. If I don't claim my full power now, if I don't become what I was born to be, he'll tear apart everything we love to get to me. The chamber's entrance exploded inward, showering them with crystalline fragments. Marcus stepped through the debris, and Kyle felt his wolf recoil from the wrongness that radiated from the creature. Where Lyra glowed with silver light, Marcus seemed to absorb all illumination, creating a void in the shape of a man. "Sister," Marcus spoke, his voice like grinding stone, "you cannot run forever. The power belongs to us both, as it always has." "You forfeited your claim when you let the shadow take you," Lyra replied, her hands beginning to glow brighter against the heartstone. "You chose destruction over balance, and you chose weakness over strength." Marcus snarled, raising his hand. Dark energy crackled between his fingers, and the temperature in the chamber plummeted. "Playing house with your little alpha, pretending to be mortal. Pathetic." Kyle's fury exploded at the dismissive tone, his wolf surging forward, even as his rational mind screamed that he was outmatched. But before he could shift, Lyra's power erupted outward in a protective barrier, silver light clashing against creeping darkness. "This isn't your fight, Kyle," she said without turning around. "This is family business." "You're my mate," he growled, letting his alpha presence fill the chamber. "That makes it my business." Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Your mate? Oh, sister, you haven't told him, have you? You haven't explained what claiming the full inheritance means?" Lyra's barrier flickered, and Kyle saw her shoulders tense. "Marcus, don't." "She'll transcend mortality entirely," Marcus continued, his void-black eyes fixed on Kyle. "No longer shifter, no longer bound to your little pack dynamics. She'll become something beyond your comprehension, beyond your ability to touch or hold or love." The truth hit Kyle like a physical blow. To save their world, he would lose her forever. The ancient stone chamber thrummed with power as Lyra pressed her palm against the crystalline heartstone embedded in the center wall. The moment her skin made contact, veins of silver light spread outward like lightning, illuminating symbols that hadn't been seen in over 1,000 years. The air itself seemed to sing with forgotten magic. "The celestial bloodline," Elder Theron whispered from behind her, his voice thick with awe. "I never truly believed the legends until now." Kyle stood rigid beside the entrance, his alpha instinct screaming danger even as his heart swelled with fierce pride. His mate was magnificent and terrifying. The power radiating from her made his wolf whimper and bow in submission, recognizing something far older and more primal than pack hierarchy. "The prophecy speaks of a choice," Lyra said, her voice echoing strangely in the chamber as the magic flowed through her. "To save our world, I must either bind the ancient evil forever or destroy it along with myself. No." Kyle's growl reverberated off the stone walls. "There has to be another way." The symbols pulsed brighter, and suddenly the chamber filled with ghostly figures, the spirits of Lyra's ancestors, their translucent forms shimmering like moonlight on water. They surrounded her, their voices joining in an otherworldly chorus that spoke directly to her soul. "The darkness stirs in the deep below," the eldest spirit intoned, her face bearing an unmistakable resemblance to Lyra. "The seals weaken with each passing hour. The rogue's attack on you was no coincidence. They serve the Shadow Court, seeking to corrupt your blood and break the final barrier." Lyra's breath caught. "The rogues who captured me were changed by shadow magic," another ancestor confirmed. "Their master seeks to turn your power to his purpose. Already he sends more servants. They come for you even now." As if summoned by her words, the sound of howls echoed from somewhere far above. Kyle's head snapped toward the chamber entrance, his nostrils flaring. "At least 30 wolves. They've found us." The ritual must be completed now, Elder Theron urged, his weathered hands shaking. Child, you must choose. Lyra closed her eyes, feeling the weight of destiny pressing down on her shoulders. The heartstone pulsed against her palm, showing her visions of possible futures, cities burning, packs scattered and broken, the world consumed by an endless night. In every vision where she chose to preserve her own life, darkness won. But there was something else, a whisper of possibility that the spirits hadn't mentioned. A third path, dangerous beyond measure but offering the faintest hope. What if I don't bind or destroy the darkness? She said slowly, opening her eyes to meet Kael's desperate gaze. What if I absorb it? The spirits recoiled, their forms flickering with alarm. Impossible, her ancestor gasped. The corruption would destroy you from within. Not if I have an anchor. Lyra turned to Kael, seeing understanding dawn in his golden eyes. The mate bond. If you can keep me grounded, keep me human, I might be able to contain the darkness without losing myself to it. Lyra, no, Kael stepped forward, his face pale. You're talking about taking that evil into yourself. I won't let you. It's not your choice to make. Her voice was gentle but firm, and it's not just about us anymore. The howls were getting closer, accompanied by the clash of steel and roars of pain. The pack warriors Kael had stationed above were fighting, but they wouldn't hold for long against shadow-corrupted wolves. Elder Theron's eyes widened as he understood her plan. To channel that much dark magic through the mate bond, it could burn out both your souls. Or it could forge something new, Lyra countered. She looked at Kael, her heart breaking at the fear and desperate love in his expression. I need you to trust me. Trust us. Before he could protest further, she reached for their bond, opening it completely. Kael gasped as her power flooded through the connection, but instead of overwhelming him, it seemed to strengthen something fundamental between them. His own alpha energy rose to meet hers, creating a perfect circuit of give and take. Together, she whispered, and pressed both hands against the heartstone. The chamber exploded with light as ancient seals shattered far below. Darkness erupted upward like a geyser of pure malevolence, seeking to escape its prison after millennia of confinement. But instead of breaking free, it slammed into Lyra's waiting power. She screamed as the shadow magic hit her, corruption and hatred trying to tear her apart from the inside. But Kael was there, his hands covering hers on the stone, his wolf strength wrapping around her like armor. The mate bond held, transforming the destroying darkness into something that could be contained. Above them, the sounds of battle suddenly ceased. Through the connection, Lyra felt the shadow-corrupted rogues collapse as their master's power was yanked away from them. But the hardest part was just beginning. The ancient chamber trembled as Lyra's power surged through the crystalline formations embedded in its walls. Each pulse of her energy sent ripples of light cascading across the sacred symbols carved into the stone, symbols that hadn't glowed for over 1,000 years. Kael stood behind her, his massive frame radiating protective fury as the remaining rogues pressed closer, their eyes wild with desperation and greed. You don't understand what you're asking for, Lyra said, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance that made the very air vibrate. The Moonwell's power isn't meant for taking, it chooses its guardians. The rogue leader, his face twisted with obsession, laughed harshly. Pretty words from a dead Omega, release the barrier or watch your mate burn. 2 rogues flanked Kael, their claws extended and dripping with silver-laced poison. Even an Alpha King could be brought down with enough of that toxin in his system. Lyra's heart clenched as she saw Kael calculate the odds, his muscles coiling for an attack that might be his last. She's not just any Omega, you fool, Kael growled, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. She's the last of the Moonborn lineage. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Several rogues stepped back involuntarily, ancient instincts recognizing the power that now radiated from Lyra in waves. The Moonborn were legend, whispered about in the darkest corners of shifter lore, beings who could channel the moon's raw power and bend reality to their will. Impossible, the leader breathed, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. The Moonborn died out centuries ago. My family hid, Lyra said, turning slowly to face them. Her eyes had transformed completely now. No longer the warm brown Kyle had fallen in love with, but pools of liquid silver that seemed to hold entire galaxies. We've been waiting, protecting the Moonwell's secret, ensuring that power-hungry fools like you could never corrupt it. The crystalline formations around them began to sing, a haunting, beautiful melody that spoke of ancient magic and terrible responsibility. Lyra raised her hands, and the very shadows seemed to bend toward her, recognizing their mistress. The Moonwell doesn't just contain power, she continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. It's a conduit to the realm where our ancestors dwell. Open it carelessly, and you don't just release energy. You tear a hole between worlds that can never be sealed. Kyle's eyes widened as understanding dawned. This was why she'd hidden, why she'd disguised herself as a powerless Omega, not from shame or fear, but to protect every living soul in their realm from those who would destroy everything in their hunger for power. The rogue leader snarled, raising a wicked blade. Enough riddles! Give us the power, or... He never finished the sentence. Lyra's hand moved in a fluid gesture, and moonlight, impossible moonlight, streamed down through solid stone. It struck the rogue leader like a physical blow, sending him crashing into the chamber wall. The blade clattered uselessly to the ground, its metal warping and melting under the touch of pure lunar energy. "Kyle, now!" Lyra shouted, and he moved like liquid death. Power exploded from her in response, raw and uncontrolled. The chamber's walls cracked, and somewhere far above them she could hear the sound of trees groaning and breaking. She was losing control, her emotions overwhelming the careful restraint she'd maintained for so long. "Lyra!" Kyle's voice cut through the chaos. He was bloodied but standing, having dispatched the last of the rogues. "You have to stop! The barrier between realms. I can see it weakening." She looked where he pointed and gasped. Through the shimmering air above the Moonwell, ghostly shapes were beginning to materialize, the spirits of the dead, drawn by the disturbance in the magical balance. If they fully manifested, if the barrier collapsed entirely... Taking a shuddering breath, Lyra began the most difficult task of her life, pulling her power back under control while her mate bled and her heart raced with terror. The ancient words of binding came to her lips, taught by her grandmother in secret midnight lessons. "By moon and star, by blood and bone, I seal what should not walk alone," she chanted, her voice growing steadier with each repetition. "Return to rest, return to peace. Let living hearts find their release." The ghostly shapes flickered and faded, the silver light dimmed. One by one, the crystalline formations stopped their ethereal singing, until only the sound of heavy breathing filled the chamber. Kyle approached slowly, his eyes full of awe and something deeper, complete, unconditional acceptance of who she truly was. The ancient chamber beneath the Shadowlands trembled as Lyra pressed her palm against the crystalline heart of the Nexus. Power coursed through her veins like liquid fire, and she could feel every shifter across the realm responding to the call. The rogue army above ground suddenly found themselves facing not just Kai's forces, but awakening shifters emerging from centuries of dormancy. "The binding is breaking," Elder Thorn whispered, his weathered face etched with both wonder and terror. "After 3,000 years, the veil between our world and the Shadow Realm is dissolving." Kai's eyes blazed gold as he felt the surge of power ripple through their mate bond. Even from the battlefield above, he could sense Lyra's transformation. She was no longer hiding behind the facade of a powerless Omega. She was becoming something far more magnificent and dangerous than any of them had imagined. Marcus Blackthorn's voice echoed through the cavern as he descended the stone steps, his remaining followers flanking him. "You foolish girl! Do you have any idea what you've unleashed?" Lyra turned to face him, her eyes now swirling with silver and gold. The ancient bloodline that had been suppressed for generations was finally awakening. I know exactly what I'm doing. The question is, do you understand what you've brought upon yourself? The Nexus crystal pulsed brighter, and shadows began to writhe along the chamber walls. But these weren't the malevolent shadows Marcus had been trying to control. These were the guardians, the protectors that had been waiting for their true keeper to return. The Shadow Realm was never meant to be conquered, Lyra continued, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. It was meant to be balanced. Your ancestors understood this. They knew that someone of the old blood would eventually need to restore the equilibrium. Marcus snarled, his shifted form growing larger as desperation fueled his power. I spent decades planning this. I won't let some pretender destroy everything I've worked for. He lunged forward, but the shadows themselves rose to meet him. Lyra didn't even flinch as tendrils of darkness wrapped around Marcus, holding him suspended in the air. The ancient magic responded to her will as naturally as breathing. Above them, the battle was turning. Kai's roar of triumph echoed through the mountains as the last of the rogue lieutenants fell. But he could sense something was wrong. The Nexus energy was growing unstable, and Lyra was at the center of it all. The merge is happening too quickly, Elder Thorn said urgently. She needs an anchor, or the power will consume her. Without hesitation, Kai abandoned the battlefield and raced toward the chamber entrance. His pack bond with his most trusted warriors would ensure they could handle the remaining cleanup. Nothing mattered more than reaching Lyra before the ancient magic tore her apart. In the chamber, Lyra was beginning to understand the true weight of her heritage. She wasn't just a descendant of the old bloodline. She was the last true Shadow Walker, capable of existing in both realms simultaneously. But the power came with a price. To fully restore the balance, she would need to anchor herself to both worlds, which meant she could never again live as an ordinary shifter. The crystal's light grew blinding as memories that weren't her own flooded through her consciousness. She saw the original war between the realms, witnessed the sacrifice of her ancestors who had sealed the rift at the cost of their own lives. She understood now why her parents had hidden her true nature, why they had died protecting the secret. Marcus broke free from the shadow bindings through sheer force of will, his eyes wild with fury. If I can't control the power, then no one can have it. He hurled himself at the Nexus crystal, intending to shatter it completely. The resulting explosion would tear both realms apart, but his madness had consumed all rational thought. Lyra moved without thinking, placing herself between Marcus and the crystal. The impact sent shockwaves through the chamber, but instead of destroying the Nexus, her presence absorbed and redirected the energy. The crystal's light stabilized, and she could feel the balance finally beginning to restore itself. But the effort was draining her life force. She fell to her knees as Marcus's unconscious form crumpled nearby, finally defeated. That was when Kai burst into the chamber, his powerful presence immediately filling the space. Their bond flared to life, and Lyra felt strength flowing back into her as their connection deepened beyond anything they had experienced before. "I've got you," he whispered, wrapping his arms around her as she collapsed against him. "We'll face whatever comes next together." Elder Thorn stepped forward, his expression grave but hopeful. "The immediate crisis has passed, but the real work is just beginning. The realms must learn to coexist again, and that will require both of you." Lyra looked up at Kai, seeing her own determination reflected in his golden eyes. They had survived the storm, but their greatest challenge still lay ahead. The ancient chamber trembled as Lyra's power surged through the crystalline veins embedded in the walls. Each pulse of her energy sent ripples of silver light cascading through the underground sanctuary, illuminating the faces of the gathered pack members who had followed them into the heart of the mountain. Kieran stood beside her, his wolf barely contained beneath his skin as he felt the magnitude of what his mate was attempting. The bond between them thrummed with her determination and the terrible weight of responsibility she carried. Around them, the remnants of the rogue pack cowered against the far wall, their bravado finally shattered by the revelation of who they had truly threatened. The seal is breaking faster than I anticipated, Lyra said, her voice strained as she pressed her palms against the largest crystal formation. Centuries of careful balance, and it's all unraveling because of their interference. The crystal beneath her touch pulsed with an ominous red light that seemed to push back against her silver radiance. Through the translucent surface, shadows writhed, things that should have remained buried in the void between worlds. Marcus stepped forward, his beta instincts overriding his awe. "What do you need us to do?" Lyra's eyes, now completely silver and luminous, swept across the assembled wolves. "Form a circle. Your combined pack energy will help me reinforce the barriers, but I won't lie to you, this will drain us all. Some of you might not survive the process." A murmur rippled through the group, but none moved to leave. Elena, despite her earlier terror, was the first to step into position. "You saved us from those monsters," she said, nodding toward the rogues. "Whatever you are, whatever this place is, we trust you." One by one, the others joined the circle. Even some of the rogues, those who hadn't been completely consumed by bloodlust, crept forward to add their strength to the effort. Lyra felt a flicker of hope as their combined energy began to flow toward her. Kieran's hand found hers, their mate bond amplifying both their powers. "Together," he murmured, and she felt his absolute faith in her wash through their connection. The ritual began with a low humming that seemed to emanate from the crystals themselves. Lyra's power flowed outward, weaving between each wolf, drawing on their life force while giving back her own ancient strength. The silver light intensified, pushing against the growing darkness that threatened to spill from the weakening seals. But the enemy they fought was not passive. The shadow creatures pressed against their prison with increasing desperation, sensing how close they were to freedom. The red light flared, and several of the smaller crystals cracked. "It's not enough," Lyra gasped, blood trickling from her nose as the strain mounted. "The damage is too extensive." That was when Kieran made his choice. Without warning, he shifted, his massive black wolf form materializing in a burst of power that sent shockwaves through the chamber. But this wasn't an ordinary shift. He was calling upon every aspect of his alpha heritage, reaching back through generations of royal bloodline to access power that few wolves ever touched. His howl shattered the air, a sound of such primal authority that every wolf in the chamber felt it in their bones. The pack bonds strengthened, their connection to their Alpha King becoming a conduit for power beyond anything they had ever experienced. Lyra's eyes widened as she felt the surge of energy flow through her mate and into her own working. This was the true power of the Alpha Bond. Not dominance, but the willing unity of a pack fighting as one against the darkness. The silver light exploded outward, racing through every crystal vein in the chamber. The red glow was pushed back inch by inch, the shadow creatures retreating deeper into their void prison. New crystalline growth began to seal the cracks, layer upon layer of protective barriers reforming. But the effort was costing them everything. Around the circle, wolves began to collapse, their energy completely drained. Lyra felt her own strength failing, her ancient reserves finally reaching their limit after centuries of maintaining the seals alone. Just as she thought they might fall short, she felt it. The mountain itself responding to their call, the earth beneath their feet pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, and Lyra realized that the entire mountain range was one massive protective structure built by her ancestors to contain the darkness. They weren't just fighting with their own power, they were connecting to a defense system that had been waiting for someone who could access it. With this final surge of earth magic flowing through her, Lyra completed the restoration. The last of the cracks sealed shut, the red light vanished, and the oppressive weight of otherworldly malice lifted from the chamber. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of exhausted breathing. Kieran shifted back to human form, catching Lyra as her legs gave out beneath her. Around them, the pack slowly picked themselves up, alive but forever changed by what they had experienced and accomplished. The ancient secret was safe once more, but Lyra knew this was not an ending. It was a beginning of a new era where the truth could no longer remain hidden, and where the pack would stand together against whatever darkness might threaten their world.